Welcome to the Doctorate in Educational Leadership Brown Bag Series. We're so glad to have each of you here with us today. I'm Julian Vasquez-Hiley, Director of the Doctorate in Leadership and Professor of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies. Also, welcome to you that are watching us online live and in perpetuity on YouTube and Facebook. Today we have two incredible guests. You get two for the price of one. You go to the store, you 2 for 1, buy one, get one free, BOGO, right? Well, that's what we have today. We have two brown bags for the price of one, and we have Dr. Amber Kim, who is a consultant and professor from Denver, Colorado. She flew in today to speak with you. And we also have Sarah Matsui, who is an author and wrote a really interesting book about Teach for America. So you get two for the price of one. They'll speak for probably about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll take your questions for about 15 minutes at the end. So again, welcome to each of you. We're so glad that you're able to join us for today's brown bag. And without further ado, Sarah Kim,
Amber
Kim, and Sarah Matsui.
Is that like a brand Melina, you know?
Yes.
We're just now Sarah Kim. Hey. Like you said, my name is Amber, and my research has always been, or my focus has always been, in understanding no excuses charter schools and charter schools in general, and really working on how are they impacting students and communities and teachers. So this is a talk titled The 10 Ways That No Excuses Schools Dehumanize Marginalized Students in the Name of Equity. So it's got lots of layers to it. It is no excuses schooling that is not only relegated to charter schools, but often began there. It's talking about dehumanization. We'll talk about what that means in a second. And it's the schools that are serving primarily Black and brown students and students experiencing poverty. So it's dehumanizing students who are already marginalized. And the worst part, or the most complicated and problematic part, is that it's often done as equity work. It's done to close the achievement gap. So that's what we'll be talking about. So no excuses schooling. That's a term that's been used and thrown around a lot lately. And it basically comes from the idea that once the Nation at Risk paper came out and said that there's a huge achievement gap between students who are students of color and low socioeconomic status and those who are white and middle class, we gotta do something about this. This is terrible, this is awful, we must do something. And what happened is, partly, no excuses schools. And it started out as no excuses for teachers. You don't have an excuse to not teach a kid. You cannot say this kid is stupid. You cannot say this kid is uncivilized. You cannot say this, oh, pobrecito, I feel so sorry for this kid. We can't expect, there's no excuses. We must educate. But what happened was, quickly, it moved to no excuses for students not to learn. No excuse for a student not to come prepared. No excuse for a student not to have a test score. You are capable, you will. 100% participation 100% of the time, which is actually superhuman to do that. So when you don't meet that, then you are less than by default. So no excuses schooling is, it's a philosophy, it's a design of schools, and it really focuses on order, efficiency, and discipline. If you know anything about broken windows theory, which has been deemed racist, that they would go into communities that were struggling or dangerous, in quotation marks. They would say they would sweat the small stuff. They would police every infraction because they believed in policing every infraction, graffiti, trash, loitering, that then you would eliminate the bigger infractions. And so this is, in no excuses schooling, how it happens here. Not broken windows theory, but it's broken windows theory for schools. They police every single action. The color of your belt, the type of shoes, your socks, your hair, how you sit in the school, what kind of pencils and pens you use, what charge your laptop is at. Every little thing, because if we can do those things, if we can get rid of all of those little things, then we will get rid of the big things like misbehavior, suspension, fighting, not attending school, drug usage in schools. So they're sweating the small stuff, which sounds really, really great. So they're really working on order, efficiency, and discipline. And there's a lot of discipline. There's a lot of, and no excuses schooling. There is no excuse for you to do blank, like be late, or miss school, or miss an assignment. And therefore, since there's no excuse, there is a consequence. So huge consequences in schools. These schools often serve, this philosophy is found in Black and brown schools and low income schools, or schools that are in communities experiencing poverty. We do not find these schools as prevalent in white middle class communities. But they would also say, when you talk to them, well, they don't need that. There is no achievement gap there. These methods are being used, again, in the name of equity. They are performing at a lower, are not achieving at the same rates as white middle class students. We need to get them there. The way we get them there is having no excuses. So you don't need that in a school that's already performing at the equivalent of white middle class students. So it's often used and implemented to close the achievement gap as an act of equity. Dehumanization. When I say dehumanizing, people often bristle. It sounds dramatic and hyperbolic. Many believe that term should be used for the Holocaust or for chattel slavery. So there's some of that bristling, like you're being really dramatic, Amber. What dehumanize, I mean, really, it's a little bit too much. And I don't think so. We'll talk about why. Because for me, dehumanization means a couple of things. Number one, it means people are deemed, whatever the policy is, whatever the practice is, it makes people in their natural state, who they are, culturally, personally, intellectually, spiritually, less than human, and therefore not as deserving of certain human rights and privileges. That's one way of dehumanizing, just making someone feel less than in their natural state. Number two would be making them objects. So if a practice or a policy literally makes a human an object, that's dehumanizing. Third, it equates them to animals, savages, or natives. Now, oftentimes they won't use that word, but it's implied in some of the policies or practices. It would say this person is not human, less than, but it would probably say they are animalistic, they are savage, or they are, we have to tame the natives. The last one is when they're just erased or ignored. They're non-existent. So when someone is made to feel non-existent, then they're not human because they don't exist. So those are the four ways we're going to be looking at dehumanization and seeing practices and policies and philosophies and actions and inactions of teachers and leaders, and see that those things happen to kids by default when you do these things, and they're made to be, they're dehumanized. One of the things that's important here is it's not always overt, and it doesn't require animus. So sometimes, oftentimes, schools, again, they're doing it in the name of equity, they're doing it to be well-intentioned, they're not doing it with malice, and they're still dehumanizing people. So it's not evil people, it's not evil people telling people that they are not human. It's often really covert and well-intended. All right. So, the first way that we see no excuses schooling dehumanize kids. They control kids' bodies. There's this piece around when you go into a no excuses school, you'll see the words slant or spark, telling kids exactly how to sit and be in classrooms. The spark one is for elementary age students, and I took these pictures in schools that I was consulting in. I am an anti-oppression consultant in schools, so I get the opportunity to go to all kinds of schools, including no excuses charter schools. And I take pictures of the things that I see. So these are not things they are hiding. These are things that are on their walls. They are proud of. It's part of their practice. One is the spark. It's sit up, pay attention, ask and answer questions, respond appropriately, keep tracking. So they are having students sit forward, sit up, sit straight, hands on the desk often, folded, your eyes forward, and wherever the teacher goes, you move your head. And you'll see it in a video in a minute. It's called tracking. And I've even presented at one of these schools doing a keynote, and the dean told the teachers to track me. And I thought that was the weirdest thing. I'm walking side to side, these teachers are just following me. And I believe people need to learn in their state. So I said to this person, didn't mean to negate the dean, but I said, please don't track me. Do what you need to do to pay attention to me. I care more about if you're really listening and taking this in than if it looks like you're listening and taking me in. So if that means you need to yawn, if that means you need to doodle, if that means you need to play on Facebook, some people need to do that to actually stay attentive. So to me, again, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your eyes and your head. You don't have to sit forward. I'm not offended if you don't sit forward in my class. I know that the people can pay attention other ways. So talking about that, not making, telling students how their bodies have to be in my classrooms, especially with students with disabilities. Not only does this hurt students of color, it also hurts kids with disabilities because sometimes it takes so much effort to sit in that way and to look this way that all of their learning attention is going to their body and managing it to not get in trouble, to get a detention or whatever a demerit is. So all of their attention is just sitting forward, keeping their hands, looking at us, doing this, that they aren't actually learning. And I think for a lot of kids that would be the case. I could not, if Julian was telling me how to sit to learn from him, I couldn't do that without really focusing on my hands. So they're missing, that's one of the ways that they're missing it. The other thing is bathroom. This is a bathroom policy that said in the hallways that if you have to go to the bathroom during class, you have to give me 15 minutes after school. So if you need to use the restroom during class, you have to stay after school for 15 minutes. I think, again, that we see these policies primarily in Black and brown and schools for communities experiencing poverty. So what we're telling people is that they don't have the right and the command over their own bowels and their own, urinary needs. So that's a human right. It's a human right to say, I have the right to go to the bathroom. Now they're saying, hey, you can go during your passing periods. Yes, and sometimes that's not when I have to go. Let's just be honest. And let's also think, these are young women. This was in a middle school, high school, they're just beginning their menstruation cycles. They're just learning how to manage bleeding on a monthly, and sometimes not a monthly, right? It's like, in the beginning, it's kind of random. They're embarrassed about it. It's all awkward. They don't know when they're leaking or bleeding. It's, women, if they do have a period, it takes them longer in the bathroom than it does for a young man in between passing periods. So one, it takes young women longer to go to the bathroom. Two, young women have periods. This is telling them they don't have command over that. If you think about young Black and brown women who have historically been told they don't have command over their bodies are used to please men, particularly white men, to then have a white principal, which often they are, or teachers telling you that you don't have command over your own body, to not listen to your own body and its needs. That has a whole level of dehumanization to it that we're not even really ready to think about. So there's sexism there, there's classism there, there's racism there, and not even to add on the sexism and transphobia that can then come from the bathroom issue. So all kinds of levels of dehumanization, embarrassment, and oppression in these two policies. Now you're going to see some other examples coming up about how kids have to walk, what they have to do with their hands, what they do with their mouths when they're walking. Throughout this presentation, you'll see that this is a theme, that schools are trying to control kids' bodies, and not just once in a while. I'm a mother of 3 kids. I control my kids' bodies, and I'm like, put your hands down. Did you knock that off? But we're talking 8 hours a day, and some of these schools have extended days. So we're talking, 8.5-hour days that they are being told what to do with their bodies and how to do it. It's not just for 30 minutes here and there. This is an all-day thing.
All right. In some of your classes, your teachers do this thing. It's called cold calling. In fact, I do it. It's when you don't raise your hand and a teacher, William, calls on you just to see, and it's not like a gotcha. It's really just a way to do a quick review. I don't call it cold calling, though. I call it hot calling, because you get a chance to shine and to show that you are on fire. So almost every day when we're talking about genre, we're going to do hot calling. It's a great way to review all of these definitions and terms that we've learned. Here's the hardest part about hot calling. You gotta keep your hands down. Your hands are folded. I will call on a person. When I call on that person, you track just like you normally do, and then you track me when you hear my voice again. Nod if you understand. Nod if you are ready for hot calling. Beautiful. Keep your hands down. Shavrian, I'm going to come back to
All right, next one. Often in no excuses schools, for the sake of efficiency, they limit and they restrict self and cultural expression. So when kids walk in their natural state is already wrong. Natural hair is not okay. Your clothing that you wear at home is not okay here. Your shoes, that you wear, they're all wrong. And if you wear them here, you will get a consequence. It's not just kind of wrong. It's like you will get a consequence. So if we take somebody who they are in their natural state and we say that that's all against the rules, not once in a while, not for church on Sundays like we all did, you gotta wear this, on Sundays, you can't wear your clothes or your home clothes. But we're talking like every day where you show up for 8 hours a day. If who you are is all of a sudden wrong, bad, worthy of detention, then what does that say to you? You don't have the right, you're not a human, you don't have the right to wear your hair the way that God or some other natural biological entity grew it. If you're not allowed to wear your clothes that are acceptable in your community, then, why don't you get that right? Why is that not okay? And why is one way of dressing, the white dominant culture way, the right way? Why don't we see the dress codes that they want uniformity? Why isn't the uniformity in another culture? So they're picking the dominant culture. They are making everyone dress this way. They are outlawing in some ways natural and cultural ways of being, and kids don't get a chance to really express themselves. And that's part of identity. Really growing, unfortunately or fortunately, young white middle-class kids have that chance to try out some weird things, right? Crazy nail polish, funky earrings, weird shoes. They get to do that. They do, for the most part they do. But in no excuses schools, they don't get to do that. In fact, in Denver, in one of the schools where I took the cat picture, the young black man had shaved a part in his head. And this was just 2 years ago. And the principal saw it and said, you're not allowed to walk in my school until you get that out of your head. He's like, how am I gonna get that out of my head? You have to shave your entire head. You have to shave it down. Because that part was very, very close to the skin, right? So he had to shave his entire head in order for him to be allowed to go back into school, because it was against the dress code. So that is not something typical of white young men to shave parts, so it was cultural expression. It was deemed criminal because it was deemed gang behavior, even though it has nothing to do with gang behavior in Denver. And it was so restricting cultural and self-expression is a form of dehumanizing kids and giving them, taking away their human right. All right, silencing. In schools, no excuses schools, there's a huge emphasis on silence. Quiet, I understand. Even quiet in the hallways, I get it. Like I said, I'm a mother and I'm a teacher, and I don't want my kids running around screaming down the hallways either. But there is such an emphasis on silence. It says, sit down quietly, copy your homework silently, begin the do now silently. And you're gonna see something else there, silent hallways through 7th grade. Absolutely silent, not quiet. So first of all, voice is the first thing that oppressors take away from the marginalized. That is how you begin to control somebody. You take away their voice. In slavery, we had people singing at one point because certain words and certain things were taken away, and then the songs were taken away. So we see that voice is a tool, saying you are not worthy of your words. Your words scare me, your words are going to overthrow me, you don't get words. Even if that's not the intention here, which I'm sure it's not. You're not thinking, I want to, you're going to overthrow me, let's take away your words. The idea is if you can control someone's voices, they are compliant. You can tell them what to do, and I know what's best for you. I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you what words to say. Even when kids talk in classrooms, they use turn and talk. Now, turn and talk is not oppressive in and of itself as a education method. I use it even in my consulting workshops, but there's even posters about how to turn and talk. What do you do for the first minute? What do you do for the second minute? what's not appropriate. They even control how you turn and talk. And turn and talk is the only way that kids are allowed to speak. They're never just allowed to speak. Like, discuss with your partner. There's always a protocol in place, as if they can't be trusted to have a conversation. And for me, I understand that kids need to have self-regulation and learn how to talk in spaces, but for me, that's done at an early age. Rather than scaffolding up, like control, 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 release, 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 I believe in early release. Have them talk when the stakes are low, and they're young, and they're cute, and you can still tolerate them talking in the hallways, because they're actually, somewhat adorable. Have them learn and be messy then, because their voices can't even get that loud, and they don't know the F word yet. So let them talk in the hallway, let them get it all out. Teach them to self-regulate then. Teach them how to talk in groups then, when it's not fighting and hard and social pressure. Let them work then, and then as you get older, they will have already learned that. No Excuses Schools flips that around. They highly, highly, highly regulate everything. And then they say around 8th grade, we'll loosen up. But they don't really loosen up. Because then you have 9th, 10th, and 11th, and 12th grade, again, regulated, and they say, in college you're gonna know what to do now with your voice. But you don't know what to do because it's been regulated the whole time. You've lost your words. So we have a video to show how one No Excuses charter school called Denver School of Science and Technology chooses to defend or explain their silence policy. We're just gonna watch the first 45 seconds.
Middle school has been compared to Middle Earth. In some ways, it is a different world. But myths and misperceptions of middle school are much stranger than reality. This is certainly true of DSST public schools. Myth number 1. Quiet hallways are weird. Every day, people calmly walk along the street or down the hall at work. No shouting or talking, everything perfectly normal. The time between classes at DSST is quiet because it's normal, and more efficient that way. Quiet hallways prevent bullying and casual cruelty. Instead, we've built healthy socializing into lunch, recess, and class time. And as the year progresses, this efficiency gives students a week more of learning without adding more school days.
All right, so training students, this is the 4th way. This isn't about what we train them to do, because if we can train them with their voices, we can train them with their bodies, we can train their bathroom policies. This is how they do it. There's a very much training like an animal. So the use of drill. In the beginning of No Excuses charter schools, the first 2 weeks is usually called something like Success Academy, but it's where they practice the norms over and over and over, and they walk kids down the hallway, and then they say, up, do it again, up, do it again. They snap at children. There's a school, it's a prevalent practice, but there's a school in Denver that I've witnessed it at, where they're redirecting, and I'm gonna do it to you, is that okay? Where they're children, we're talking elementary age children. Turn around, up, sit, right in their faces. And finally, at University Prep in Denver, we had been pushing back on this behavior, and they were saying, no, this is, you want bad things for kids. You don't want us to do what's right for them. This is working. And finally, parents stood up and said, you're treating my children like dogs. Stop it. And they stopped. But the parents were afraid to say something because they don't have very many education options in Denver. So they didn't want to say something and then lose their spot. But finally, that was it. So this is how they're training kids. This also has to do with bodies, controlling bodies. They have the kids walk with their hands behind their back and sometimes with their mouths like this. And I think that if you could take a picture of kids, this is my comparison, and I found a picture on the internet. If you can find pictures of prisoners that mirrors how you're walking with little children in a hallway, there's an issue. And we notice that these children are black and brown. They are not white children. The training of kids is the use of demerits and fake positive dollars or whatever you want to call it. Again, it's all like reward and consequence, but it's very shallow. It's not rooted in knowing kids and what they want and what would help motivate them. It's very much like animals. All right, publicly shame and humiliate students. So when students make mistakes in No Excuses charter schools, regardless of FERPA and their rights to privacy, they are often publicly shamed and humiliated. One of these practices is the apology circle. So when somebody's late, they make the community, they have to apologize to the circle. We know, though, that the people who are most late often are students with transportation issues, which are students experiencing poverty. So we're talking about students with bus issues, we're talking about students with parents that don't have reliable cars, students who take care of siblings. So when they are late, they disproportionately have to be apologize to a community and say, I am sorry for my turning of the community, for my lateness. There's no excuses. They're just made to do that. And so you're pointing it out. And sometimes it's the same kid over and over, and it's the same kid over and over because that same kid has an unreliable car, or a mother that's working several jobs. Now this is the other way I see it. I walked into a school, these were giant, bigger than that, giant TV screens in the common space. One for 6th grade, one for 7th grade, one for 8th grade. And it listed all of the, who had detention that day. They name it different things. They name it college prep, refocus, and mandatory tutoring. They name them different things. But they listed the student's first name, first and last name on these boards. They listed the offense or the thing that got them in trouble for every single kid. So over here you see for college prep, somebody has a detention for having a computer charged less than 85%. This is the sweat the small stuff, and if it's not on this slide, it's on another one I have. But it's really silly things. Not silent, not silent, not silent, not silent, not silent, not silent during silent time. So we are giving kids all these detentions for not being silent during silent time. I don't know when silent time it is, but it's a lot of not silent time. And then mandatory tutoring actually listed the academic need that they were there for, whether it was a retest, whether it was to work on reading. I mean, so you're putting kids' academic needs out for the entire school to see. So this is one thing I saw it and I said, I pulled the principal out. This is the last day I ever consulted for them. I can't imagine why. But it was the last day because I said, this is a violation but I'm going to report this. And he's like, oh, well, this is what we do here. This is effective. This is how he literally said, close the achievement gap. Because that's what they say all the time. So I said, well, I think they violated FERPA and I'm going to call an attorney. And at that point, I no longer worked for them. So that's how that one went over. But it's public shaming. And they have a right, a human right to privacy, guaranteed by the government. This one is related. It's about criminalizing that behavior. So not only did they just say it was a misbehavior, what was the thing, what was the rule break, it's an offense. We're using the word of the criminal justice system for kids. And if you look at this, even if it is an integrated school, I was counting the names, and you can kind of tell, depending, sometimes culturally associated names of kids of color. First of all, they were male names, even those schools 50-50. And almost all of them were names that are associated with Black and brown families. So those were the kids' names, and the offense, it was an offense. We talked earlier about how who they are in their natural state, who they wake up as, who they go to their grandmother's house as, who they are on the street, is made criminal, is made delinquent. Their language is made delinquent. Their clothes are made delinquent. Look at the hoodies. I mean, how afraid are white folks of hoodies? So afraid. They're criminal. They're criminalized. So when who you are, even your bathroom needs, are made delinquent and criminal, that makes you a criminal. Right? And that makes you less than human in some ways. You don't get voting rights. You don't get, you're looked down on. So it's a way of dehumanizing when you criminalize. Number 7 is erase students' languages. So even if there are no Spanish rules, and that is debatable, some places still have no Spanish rules, whether or not that's legal, there is this huge emphasis on speaking proper academic English. When we erase someone's language, we erase their cultural identity. When we erase their cultural identity, we are dehumanizing them. We are making them less than. Their culture is less than, their language is less than, they are less than. So by focusing and calling standard English proper or standard or correct or good, you're saying that is the ultimate. That is the measure, that is right, and anything below that is not. We focus on this all the time. There's this in No Excuses charter schools, there's this idea, and it's well intended, that if I don't teach them how to navigate power, they will do poorly. And that's so fair. That's right. We cannot teach kids to dress any way they want to the interview. We cannot teach kids they can speak any way they want. There are rules to navigate, and we have to empower them with those rules. But we don't have to tell them that those things are good and right and proper. We can tell them they are powerful. They are skewed in this world, but this is the language of power. This is the dressing of power. This is how you have to sit when you are black or brown in a college class, because they will assume you are dumb, and that is wrong. But it is the way. That's different than saying, this is the good way to sit. This is the good thing to do with your eyes. That's different. When you start assigning value to it, that's when it becomes dehumanizing. When you start saying, this is just what it is, you can say, oh, well, who I am is human and good. Those people are a little bit crazy because they are saying that this is right. It puts it in perspective. It might depress you because you're sad that that's the way power is, but they already know that. So not calling it proper English, not calling it standard English, calling it the language of power, and saying it isn't right or good or better, and giving opportunities to also speak in the way that you speak, and seeing value and beauty in it. Someone said, if you look at the Black vernacular English, that if we were to teach all kids, including our white kids, the richness and beauty of Black vernacular English, the complexity, it's very, very complex. And no one, I never learned that. No one took the time to teach me as a language in and of itself and how complex and beautiful it is, that we should be teaching them that, not just teaching them standard English. And saying, yeah, this isn't a powerful language, but it's a beautiful language. We teach kids Latin, for God's sakes. We teach them Latin. Latin, is not powerful. No one uses it anymore, but it's beautiful and it can be used. Why not teach a language that's relevant? This is a poem, and it's all about how in this language, I am not myself in this language, English for all of us who are held captive. So it's just making it messy, that you can, even if it's not a Spanish-speaking population, if you force your tongue on some other group, that is a form of dehumanization, because you're saying, this is the way we speak, your way is not good. The other part of erasing languages is erasing names. So when we take away people's language, it also usually means we're taking away their names and how they're said properly. Names are part of humanity. When we give names, humans get names, right? That's part of being a human, is you're named. And your name is said and it matters. And you can name yourself, but it's about names. Think of one human that you have that you know that doesn't have a name. It's a right to being human. So when we take away kids' names, or we mispronounce them, or we tell them, oh, I'm just going to call you this because it's easier, that is an act of erasing their language or erasing their identity, and it's dehumanizing. My friend had a dog, and she's from Romania. The dog's a very, very pouty dog, and he would look at her and beg and whine for things, and she got mad at him, and she's like, don't you look at me like that. If we were in Romania, you wouldn't even have a name, because she's trying to say, you're lucky you're in America. You're lucky you're treated like a human here. You have a name. Because in Romania, that's not how we treat dogs. Dogs are animals. And they don't get names. They get called dog. You're a dog. So what she's saying is about the power of names and the right to have them said. This is a beautiful one about, to all the girls who have heavy names, correct them when they say your name wrong, then watch their tongue stumble over its own discomfort as it tries to find its footing on the land it cannot steal. So it's about having our children demand their names be said. Over-testing and reducing student to data. No Excuses charter schools are so focused on ending the achievement gap that they test students all the time to figure out where they are, to figure out what needs to be taught next. It's always in good intention to say, what else can I teach you? Where am I falling short? What don't you know? What do you know? And then moves on to the next thing. This means that they're tested all the time, right? There's a lot less time learning and a lot of time assessing. That data is also used. We're always talking about data digs, data, and we lose the name of the student. We think of them as data points. We think of their data, their objectives, their skills, their mastery levels. And, this goes back to the FERPA thing, we post it. And they always get around posting it, so it's not quite a FERPA evaluation, a FERPA What's the word I'm looking for? Violation is the word I'm looking for. Thank you. And it's kind of iffy. So this one is a bunch of kids' names, and it's +1, +8, +2. That's their growth score. So is it technically their score? No, but I can tell that Rosalind only got a +1 and Eric got a +8. Well, but I don't know where you started and I don't know where you ended. So they're getting through it, but they are posting kids' growth. So when you reduce someone to testing and to data, you're making them objects and you're taking away their humanity. The last, oh no, not quite. The last one for me, and then we're going to move to Sarah, is miseducation. So one of the ways we dehumanize students is by actually teaching them the not truth. Truth that undermines their truth. And sometimes it's very confusing for kids because they're thinking, but wait a minute, that's not what I know. And so if you're teaching me something as truth and that's not what I know to be true, or that's not how I feel, you turn their compass upside down. They don't know the truth anymore. And usually the truth that you're teaching them is that they are not enough. So in this one, this is my daughter who is identifies as a brown young individual, and she was dressed up as a pilgrim. And I did not know this, and I went to school one day for their lunch celebration, and I took a picture of her, and I said, get that off of you. And we talked a lot about colonization, and that pilgrims aren't who they are saying that they are, but there's a much, much messier thing out there. And yes, maybe there's some of this, but there was also genocide, and I use a much softer word, I'm sure. But that there is, that they dress my daughter up as a colonizer and someone who committed genocide. And I don't agree with that. And we talk about the textbook saying things like, when the European settlers arrived, they needed land to live on. The First Nations peoples agreed to move to different areas to make room for the new settlements. That's not true. And when you teach Native, Indigenous, Brown, and Black kids that this is what happened, you are undermining their truth. And that means you are not human. You do not have right to your truth. Only we have right to the truth. We are fully human. We get to tell you. And this is just one example of a miseducation that happens. There are definitely many others, around slavery. But there's so many that happen, and they happen in the null curriculum and in the taught curriculum. So what is taught and what is not taught. Right, number 10.
Perfect. So Amber had kind of outlined some of the ways that no excuses policies can be dehumanizing towards students, and it's not just students it's dehumanizing for, is what I'm going to focus on. So it's also dehumanizing for teachers, and it's dehumanizing in a couple ways. It's one, teachers are important as people, and then two, teachers are also serving these students, and they can't do their best work if they themselves are not well. Even if we take as narrow a metric as student scores, studies show that teachers' well-being, their mental well-being, is correlated with students' test scores. So that is just one of the ways it's indicative that teachers' well-being matters. So some context, I conducted a study on 26 Teach for America core members, fellow core members in the greater Philadelphia region. And Teach for America, as many of you in this room probably know, is one of the champions of this no excuses movement. It's part of the curriculum under which many Teach for America core members are taught. And so when I first started this study, as an anecdote, I was a core member in 2011 to 2013 in Philly, and we would go from classes in which we as core members were instructed in this no excuses policy. No excuses for us, and we're supposed to enforce this no excuses for students. And after these no excuses class, a bunch of my fellow teachers would go to the bar across the street and drink to blackout on weekdays. And it's they were not doing very well. And there was this huge disconnect between the marketing and the language of this no excuses institution and what I was witnessing a lot of my fellow core members experiencing. They were coping. And so I ended up conducting this study at first with the intent of presenting to Teach for America. I was hey, you need to understand, the story that you're running with is not matching up here. What can we do about that? And so I surveyed and interviewed 26 core members over a few years. That it was a voluntary participation study, and we don't know what percentage of the core that is because Teach for America doesn't disclose how many people drop out, so we don't know how many people are in the core. But the core members who I interviewed suggested and made estimates that about 25% of the core dropped out, and so these are only, of the 26 people who I interviewed, they estimated that that was more than 10% of their starting class, and 7 of them had also been nominated for the National Teaching Award that Teach for America gives out. So these aren't people who are flunking out of TFA, these are people who are still doing well by the metrics of the institution. And in the initial survey, we found 25 of the 26 reported experiencing at least one major issue. So between professional counseling, taking prescription medications that they hadn't used to take before, increased alcohol consumption, major weight change, strained relationships, physical fatigue to the point of passing out and being hospitalized. And they described their experiences with the words like shame, failure, isolating, just weren't doing well, and there wasn't space within the organization to talk about these things either, because if they were to bring these issues up, then it would be narrated as, do you not care about children? No excuses. Like, why aren't you showing the results? Like, if you are doing the other thing that you say that you need to do to take care of yourself, then you're like withholding something back. And this is incredibly dehumanizing. Like, again, these people matter as people and they matter as teachers. Like, they can't show up to do their best work for students if they themselves are struggling this much. And as you kind of delve in, and one of the things that I started to try to contextualize in my research is, it makes sense also that they were struggling, right? Like, the schools that we were being placed in as core members are under-resourced. This structural, educational inequity is a structural issue, and instead, these core members were being told to teach their students that this is entirely their own responsibility. This is within their locus of control. Like, again, like that difference that Amber was kind of starting to illustrate. Like, yes, it's one thing to say that this system isn't fair and like, here's how we can try to navigate that together, and it's another thing to say, no, you are the one entirely responsible for this. It's not about the system, like you are the one who needs to make these behavioral changes entirely. It's not that a broader society needs to be held accountable, to be told no excuses. It's individual teachers, individual poor students of color who are told no excuses. And like one of the things I thought was really interesting as I was kind of doing this research, in part of the Teach for America curriculum, we weren't ever taught about school funding. So in Philadelphia, where this study was conducted, within the city limits, per pupil expenditures were $9,000 per student for the city's 79% Black and Latino population. Whereas if you went into the Philly suburbs, the budget was basically double that at $17,000 for a 91% white population. So like almost double in budget per student with a 79% student of color population versus 91% white student of color. And that wasn't ever part of the conversation. Instead, the conversation was refocused on like, what about these individual students? What about these individual teachers of color? They need to be making up for this difference, without also taking into account like, this is a broader conversation and other changes need to be incorporated in order to move forward.
All right. To close, I have something about from Maria Salazar, and she says that in a school, to close the achievement gap, she was a student of color. She said, yeah, my teachers taught me the essentials, reading, writing, and math. However, I never saw myself reflected in the content or context of my schooling. As a consequence, my teachers inadvertently taught me that people who looked like me had little value. I remember wishing my skin away in the 3rd grade, wishing I could be white. I had come to associate whiteness with success and brownness with failure. I was overwhelmed with feelings of shame over the most essential elements of my humanity, my culture, my heritage, my language, and my parents. I learned to read, write, and do math. It came at a heavy cost. Say that if we don't evaluate no excuses schooling and the methods it is using, even with good intention to close the achievement gap, we might teach them to learn to read, to write, and to do math. We might close the achievement gap, but there'll be a huge humanity gap. People who can read and write, but don't feel human. Thank you.
So we have about 7 minutes for questions or so. If there are questions, very insightful, very critically important conversation.
How does an apology circle work?
I think, so apology circles are actually, they come out of, I think out of an African cultural tradition, but in an original apology circle, the one when it's done well, the person who offends the community says they are sorry and says how his or her actions impacted the community, and the community says they are sorry to the person and says, we mustn't have supported you. We are at fault as well. Please accept our apology. The way that it functions in no excuses schools is they say, I'm sorry, I was late, I hurt the community, and the community just kind of nods. Then another kid is put front and center, so it's almost just like outing each kid. And there's no like, why were you late? Let's see if you need to apologize. What did you really do to the community? You know, or is this practice gonna hurt you and make you not want to come at all? Make you miss the whole first hour? Because if you come kind of in the first 30, then you have to apologize, but you don't necessarily if you've missed, you know what I mean? Because the apology circle. So they're not looking beyond that. So they just literally are in front of the whole school every morning. There's some kind of morning meeting in the morning, and they have to apologize in front of the whole school or the whole grade level.
It just seems to me like such an opportunity to go the other way, because when you find out that the child was late because they were taking care of their grandmother or something like that, and you realize they're making them choose between their family and their school.
And there's a way, I think, to hold both, right? I'm not saying to hold low expectations, which is what many people would tell me I'm doing, which is saying, let them be late. They're black, they're brown, they're poor, let them be late. It's like, no, I would still have that conversation. I would still figure out why it's happening. I would still try to figure out, can we help you? What do we need to understand? What do you need to understand? I just wouldn't do it in a way that's so efficient to them or disciplinary. I would do it in a humanizing way. Like, what's going on here? What can we do? What do I need to know? This isn't gonna work. What can we do differently? So it doesn't mean black and white. It doesn't mean go this way and let kids who are experiencing poverty just run amok, which is what people will really say when they hear my presentation, that I just believe in no standards. But it's not that. It's humanizing practices.
It speaks to my question. I was going to ask you, how do you teach the difference between tolerance and acceptance?
And can you say more about that? What do you mean by tolerance?
Tolerance would be accepting, as you say, just let them be late. It's because it's relative to their nationality. Whereas you took the flip side, what can we do for you? Is it something you need to tell me? How can we help you? To me, that's acceptance, because now you've entered the arena, coming to this probably troubled student, who knows, and letting them know that I recognize you as a human, I recognize you, right? So I need you to recognize I'm coming to you as a human because I'm human, and we can relate on that level. Whereas tolerance is something altogether different.
Yes. No, you just said that's exactly what I would do. And I think what I do also, I do two things. One, I name power. So one of the things I always do is naming power. So if there's a thing that I need them to do, because like be on time every single day. Like if we don't do that, whether or not it's right or wrong, because some communities it's not wrong. Some communities there's a different standard of showing up. I'm not going to say being on time all the time every day is right, but I'm going to say it's powerful. And I'm going to say to some people, if you do this, if you don't do this, you will fuel their hate, and So one, this is a powerful thing. You can choose to bucket. I'm not going to take away your choice, but this is what will happen. So understanding that. And then two, I would approach with a human piece. And then there's that. I'm not going to come up with a punitive. Let's figure out what's going on here. So one, name power. Two, I don't say human. I say relationship. I use relationship.
So how would a teacher in K-12, even in a college atmosphere, I think it would be more mandatory, or should be more mandatory than the college level, that you would teach them, students, freshmen, all the way, hopefully they would have gotten it before they get into a master's program. But how do you teach them acceptance? Because they've come from so many different backgrounds now, and they have a huge generation gap of understanding, I have to say, an understanding gap. What's right, what's wrong, manners, say excuse me, don't be pushy, I, me, right? How do you instill that in them without being that dictator?
Well,
and why is it not taught in freshman orientation or freshman first year experience or something like that?
I I don't know, other than using nonviolent communication, which is a strategy that we use that they could teach and learn in their freshman seminar, which is this idea of speaking through feeling and action. And I know it sounds kind of hokey, but when we speak from a place of, I feel blank, when you blank, I need this from you. I mean, that's what I do with my students who use their phones in my class in college. You know, they're up in the front row, and I'll pull them down the hallway. Then everyone's in detention, whatever we use in college. I don't say that, but I don't give that. I pull them aside though, and I don't let it go. So I pull them aside. So that's the two things. I don't humiliate them in front of the class, and I don't let it go. I pull them aside, and I say, you know, I feel pretty crappy and embarrassed when you do that in front of the whole class. Like, you don't care about what I'm teaching. And, you know, I really need you. If you don't want to be here, I need you to not be here. But I don't need you to be here and on your phone, because that just feels really terrible. And hopefully, and if they say, well, you know what, my kid is really sick, I gotta keep my phone on, which was not the case in this situation. Or I might even say, you know, if you have an emergency and you need to have your phone, by all means, is that what's happening? And I knew it wasn't. And she was just on her phone texting. But, you know, giving that space for her to be human, even if she's not being human, saying, you know what, I'm a human, and you're hurting me, and I'm not gonna tolerate that. What I think happens in schools is kids will try to be human and say, and tell off the white teacher, be really angry at the white teacher. Because that white teacher just really, that woman disrespected like a young girl of color, right? And they'll say, the administration will say, you're wrong, you get a detention for being disrespectful. But no one's saying to the young woman, you know, wow, what courage, what self-respect you have. That teacher was disrespectful to you. So also saying she felt tremendously disrespected when you did this to her, and actually, instead of disrespect, she was standing up for herself. You know, and then you talk to the girl, hey, that ain't gonna fly, you know that? Because look at how power happens. What could you do? But also sometimes saying, you know what, you did the right thing, and you're gonna accept the consequence, but you know, those conversations don't happen. It's always one way.
I think it also depends on what kind of citizens we want our schools to create.
That's exactly.
Do we want them to create automatons who do everything that their leaders tell them to do in a 1984 sense? Or do we want critical thinkers that can engage in a democracy and are interested in community ideals, right? In my view, there are a set of schools that work very hard to take the spirit and courage away from our children. And then there are other schools, particularly in wealthy neighborhoods, that are teaching them to be critical thinkers and to think about innovative ways to approach problems and to break rules when necessary. But in communities of color, we're doing exactly the opposite in those schools. And that has implications for their economic prospects, for their prospects as leaders, etc. I need to close this down unless there's one final question that's burning. Okay. Thank you so much for coming to this brown bag. We appreciate all of you being here. The contact information for our presenters are here, so please reach out to them for questions. Thank you to those of you that are watching online right now at Facebook and in perpetuity on YouTube and other social media challenges. And so signing off now for the Doctorate in Educational Leadership at Sacramento State.